Good morning, everyone. It's Miss Harris here. So, because of today's virtual assembly, we're not going to have enough time for a Zoom meeting. So, I wanted to just be safe and make this video to make sure I could cover what we're supposed to do today. And I will still be available during fifth period for office hours and periodically throughout the day to answer any questions you may have that you send me via private message, post on the stream, or to my email. All right, so for the warm-up, it's just like the assignment we did yesterday with identifying properties. So take a minute to pause this video, complete the warm-up, and then I'm going to check the answers with you. Okay, so for number one, because we changed the order and the operation that's happening here in this problem is addition, it's the commutative property of addition. And forgive me, I'm just abbreviating here. For number two, because we multiplied a number by 0 and got 0, it's the zero property of multiplication. Number three, it's the commutative property of multiplication. Number four, it's the associative property of multiplication. Number five is the additive identity. Number six is the multiplicative identity. Number seven is the associative property of addition. Number eight is the multiplicative property of -1. So go ahead and check your answers with these answers for the warm-ups. And now we're going to move on to part 2 of this worksheet. So for part 2 of this worksheet, what we have to do is simplify expressions using the properties. So in these first two examples, I give you the steps for simplifying this expression in its most detailed form. And what you're going to have to do for the next 8 expressions is simplify them in their most detailed forms, as well as justify using the properties listed at the top of this worksheet. So let's get started. So in the expression, we need to look at what happened between the first line of the expression and the second line of the expression so that we can see in parentheses the position of the terms changed place. So what that means is that to justify this, we used the commutative property. Of addition. How do we know we use the commutative property? Because if we think back to yesterday when we were identifying the properties, the commutative property is the only property where our terms change order, right? CO, change order. For the second step in this problem, we want to look at what changed between line 2, where we just said the commutative property of addition took place, and what changed from it to get from line 2 to line 3. So if we look, we see that the parentheses moved from one grouping to the other grouping of terms. So when we change the grouping of our terms in an expression, that is when we use the associative property. And because the operation happening here is addition, that's why we say it's the associative property of addition. And then for us to get from line 3 to line 4, all we did was combine our like terms or add or simplify. So for our last step, we can say combine like terms. Okay, let's look at problem 10 now. So for problem 10, we need to look at how we got from the original problem, so 3 times in parentheses x times 6, how we get from that to 3 times in parentheses 6 times x. So what happened from step 1 to step 2 is that x times 6 changed positions, which means that we changed the order or used the commutative property. Of multiplication, because the operation happening here is multiplication. Now to get from lines 2 to line 3, we need to look at what changed. So in line 2, the parentheses were around 6 times x, but now the parentheses are around 3 times 6. So when we move our grouping or change where the parentheses are in an expression, that is the associative property. And because the operation happening here is multiplication, it's of multiplication. So I've been abbreviating it mostly on this sheet so far, but you can also completely spell out the words. And then lastly, to get from line 3 to line 4, what happened? So from line 3, we had 3 times 6, and in line 4, we just have 18, and then it's times x, so we multiplied. Now for the next 8 expressions, you have to simplify the expression as well as justify the expression for each step. So I'm going to go over 11, and then the rest are your responsibility. So if we look at expression for problem 11, we have 2 plus 7m in parentheses, and then outside of the parentheses, we're adding 5 to that. So if we think back to what we were doing in 9 and 10 and the way that those expressions were simplified, we saw that we were usually doing the commutative property or changing the order of the expressions so that the terms that were similar or the like terms were next to each other. Then we changed the grouping by applying the associative property, and then we simplified either using addition or multiplication, whatever operation was happening there. So you're going to have to follow similar steps for all of these problems. So for us to have our like terms next to each other in this expression here, we have 2 in the beginning of our parentheses, and then we have 5 at the end over here. We need to change the order of our terms that are in the parentheses. So from line 1 to line 2, which we're now writing for ourselves, we're going to have 7m plus 2 in parentheses, and then we're going to add 5 to that. And all we did to get from line 1 to line 2 is we changed the order of our terms that are in parentheses. And when we change the order of terms, we're using the commutative property. And in this expression, we're using addition, so it's the commutative property of addition. Now, because of our parentheses, we obviously cannot combine 7m plus 2, but if we can change the grouping, then we'll be able to combine 2 plus 5. So I need to change where my parentheses are. In the expression. And when we change where our parentheses are in an expression or change the grouping, we're using the associative property. And then let's not forget to specify the operation. So it's the associative property of addition. And then for our last step in completely simplifying this, I can now do what's in parentheses. So when we do 2 plus 5, we get 7. So our final line in simplifying this expression is 7m plus 7. And what we did at this step is we combined our like terms, or we added. So hopefully you all found this helpful. For problems 12 through 18, you're going to be doing similar steps. I'm going to give you a hint right now. For problem 14, there's one less step for justifying this. But for the rest, you're going to have 3 steps for justifying. So you should have 3 additional lines written for simplifying your expressions for all of these problems, except problem number 14, where you'll have 2 steps for justifying your solution. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a public comment on this stream if it will help everyone, a private comment to me directly if it's something that you specifically have a comment on, or an email if you find that you aren't able to communicate your question with me on Google Classroom. Don't forget, the way that you're receiving your full grade today is by taking a picture or completing this electronically and submitting it on Google Classroom for your grade. I'm going to be grading 2 of these problems. You don't know which 2 I'm going to be grading, so it's best for you to complete all of them so that you make sure you have the best opportunity of getting 100% on today's assignment. Other than that, have a great day, everyone.